Okay, this year has had a lot of new releases that I've been very excited for, but this one didn't actually get the chance because I didn't know that this album was dropping until last week. So I had to cram all of my excitement into a short amount of time. And yeah, when the album released, let's find out what we think about it. Whee! By Arcade Fire. So Arcade Fire is a Canadian indie rock band. They comprise of the husband-wife duo of Win Butler and I think it's Chardonnay. I know it's French. Alongside Richard Ree Perry, Tim Kingsbury, and Jeremy Guerra. And all of these guys have put out about 6. In fact, if you look at the liner sleeve for you have the 3 lines for the W and the 3 lines for the E, comprising the 6 albums that incorporate the band's discography. The one thing that I love about Arcade Fire is they're so great at distilling a concept for each of their albums. Each of their albums has a very unique sound. It has a unique presentation of music. And this is going way back to the one that really made them famous, Funeral, back in 2004. And I mean, I'm going to show my age. I was back in high school at the time, and this was when I was really deep into my 70s prog. And a number of my friends were like, you gotta listen to music from today. And I'm like, all the music today sucks. So they had me listen to a handful of bands, and Arcade Fire was one of them. And I'm like, all the music of today sucks, except for Arcade Fire and System of a Down, but everything else sucks. I love how they were really revolutionizing what rock was doing in the mid-2000s and continued that with Neon Bible, their follow-up. Love that dripping with haunting melodies and haunted sounds. The Suburbs was great, not my biggest and favorite album. That's reserved for The Reflector. Love The Reflector. And then, of course, Everything Now is fine. It's fine. But each of these albums have their own distinct identity that is different from the rest, but still have this Arcade Fire essence about it. Like, you listen to it and you know you're listening to Arcade Fire. And that is really a sign of creative genius. But yeah, we come to Wii from this year. So the concept coming into this one, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the concept because in the one hand, it's both the strength and the weakness of this album. The strength in that I really do enjoy a good framework for an album. And this album has 2 sides. It's the eye side, which is why there's so much imageries to eyes. Seeing, observing, consuming, being insular, being isolated, being singular, being othered, almost like willingly othered, to be a consumer, to having to digest everything. And so you have the I aspect of it, but then you also have the we aspect, the communal aspect, the collective consciousness. We're all in this together. The only way through is by essentially uniting and coming together as a whole. So I really like these 2 ideologies and how they play out throughout the album's runtime. So the first half of the album, we have some of the more intimate tracks, a lot more of the somber tracks. The album starts off with the 1-2 punch of the Age of Anxiety 1 and Age of Anxiety 2 Rabbit Hole that make up about 11-ish minutes, coming into the 12 minutes. And I really do enjoy how Arcade Fire is always able to use a double track like this, like part 1 and part 2, because there's a lot of prog bands that like to divide their tracks up for runtime to get the algorithmic plays across their albums, and they're not, Arcade Fire's not privy to that. They're very distinct tracks while still maintaining the narrative flow. You can tell that Age of Anxiety 1 and Age of Anxiety 2 Rabbit Hole are 2 very distinct tracks, but they just share a lot of the same motifs. So in that case, I feel like Arcade Fire has really mastered what it means to kind of blend tracks together to create new essences, to create new music. And this is something that I feel like a lot of prog bands really need to learn from, especially modern prog bands. So if we continue playing on with the whole concept of the I and, this individualized consumer-based idea, and I mean, they already kind of tackled this concept on Everything Now, but they kind of continue this idea with Age of Anxiety and especially on End of Empires 1, 2, 3, and 4 with this need to consume, to process, to be the, like, you always got to stay on top of things. But by the time we get to End of Empire 4, Sagittarius A, this is where it's just like, nope, we're done. Like, I've had enough of this. And the music pretty much reflects that. With all the music that came before, it was very intimate. It was very, like, one-on-one. It felt very personal. But by the time you get to the End of Empire 4, it does feel much more disconnect. And I mean, the lyrics go with that. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of metaphor. There's not a whole lot of allegory towards that. It's basically straight up like, I'm unsubscribing. I don't care anymore. I don't need to be this consumer of goods. I don't even care about whatever season we're on. Like, that's it. I'm done. Right. And I do enjoy that there's a little bit of this like angst that's found within that, because I mean, Arcade Fire is always very good at really like masking angst with an action. You know, I do feel like some of the better activist music has that, instead of just, this is what is wrong with the world. Great. What do you want to do about that? Nothing. It's like, well, okay. But at least Arcade Fire has this like direction that they want to go in. It's like, okay, we're disconnecting. We're moving away from all that, and then that kind of transition us into the second half of the album, which is We. And it does start with probably the two strongest tracks off the album of Lightning 1 and Lightning 2. And I do like the continuation of Lightning 1 into Lightning 2, providing about 5.5 minutes, 6 minutes worth of music. Because this is the real first time on the album where there's any kind of real drive on it. Because the first half, outside of maybe End of Empires Parts 1 and 3, which feels like a Lennon track, like John Lennon, with a lot of his more artistic, visionary kind of a tracks, there was this real lethargicness, this real like, well, this is how it is, and what are we going to do about it? So I do really, really appreciate that the Lightning Part 1 and 2 is really like, this is what's happening. This is the spark of light. This is the call to arms. And I like that it has this get up and go, because the Lightning Part 2 is the real highlight for this album for me. I love how driven it is. I love how punchy it is. It's reminding me of a lot of those like much more engaging and really like powerful moments from like The Suburbs, or even as far back as Funeral, where like it's a call to arms. It's like, we're going to get this done. And so luckily that that momentum, that call to arms is really continued on with Unconditional 1 and 2. And I really enjoy Unconditional 1 in having some of these really dynamic sounds. Like, I'm loving the harmonizations that come upon it. I'm loving a lot of the different layerings of noise that we have on there. And Unconditional 2 does kind of feel like the intersection between, as I mentioned, Yellow from Coldplay, but also like Mountains Beyond Mountains from The Suburbs. Like, it kind of has that same kind of drive, that same kind of rhythm section. And Peter Gabriel is featured on this. And so, you know, I love Peter Gabriel. He's might be my all-time favorite artist. And so I really do love that his personality is on here, the same way that like David Bowie's personality was found on Reflector. So yeah, I like how the first half of this album is very intimate, very somber, a little bit lethargic, but still has a little bit of like this, okay, we're done. And then once we get into the second half of the album, it's a lot more energizing. It's a lot more lively in that sense. I just wish the last track of We had a little bit more stay power, had a little bit more of an oomph to it, because it's probably the weakest track. It's just Win Butler on the guitar, and that's about it, you know, for a band that is so good at ending an album off. I just felt like this one missed the mark a little bit for me. It just, I don't know, it wasn't all that exciting. It took all of the energy that it was from the Lightning and Unconditional and just kind of didn't do anything with it. So it was a shame that, you know, the title track, the big closing piece, wasn't this like realization of a call to arms, or it wasn't this like really finite like punctuation mark. Instead, it was just like, okay, so here's where we are. Now what are we going to do? Overall, We from Arcade Fire, it's not necessarily their best album, for sure. I think that their best days are kind of behind them. But what I will say is that they're still a master at constructing music, at really utilizing the album as a craft, you know, the actual album itself as a piece of art, much like they have with all their other ones. It's interesting because I will say that at this point, the highest highs from Everything Now don't really compare to the highest highs from this one, but the lowest lows from Everything Now, nowhere near as bad as the lowest lows from this album. So I kind of like put this one a little bit better in terms of like being a unified sound, because Everything Now was definitely all over the place. This one is a lot more concise, a lot more visioned, you know, it's a lot more realized in that sense. So in the end, I will say that We by Arcade Fire is still one that I would pick up in physical format. You know, if you're a fan of the album as an art piece, I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's a lot more, as I mentioned, a lot more lethargic, a lot more mellow, a lot more intimate than a lot of their other works have been. But once you get into the music, once you get into some of those more call to arms tracks, it's a really rewarding listen as well. So yeah, there we go. That's all I've got for We from Arcade Fire. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.